Good morning. I see my task of introducing this session is a little bit redundant because of the excitement in the room, but I'd like to discuss our session this morning, Connections. That's the theme of the CSBA Congress 2012. It seems a fitting and appropriate one for a signature event this morning. Making connections between Canada's public school network and its First Nations, Inuit and Métis communities is a fitting and appropriate priority for all of us. As AFN National Chief Signe Atleo told us in yesterday's video clip, we surely have so much to learn from each other. The four prominent Canadians who are about to join us promise to inspire and challenge us in pursuing that important journey. An opening word this morning will first be offered by one of Canada's transformational leaders of Canada's First Nations, an Ojibwe chief, human rights advocate, and inspired strategic thinker. In a moment, I'll call upon a former three-term national chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Mr. Phil Fontaine. Mr. Fontaine's message will be followed by what promises to be an inspiring dialogue. That dialogue will feature a former Prime Minister of Canada, an iconic and internationally recognized folk singer and civil rights trailblazer, and a rising star of incisive and reliable broadcast journalism. The Right Honourable Paul Martin has made the advancement of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis issues a main passion and a key focus of his post-Prime Ministerial life. The Martin Aboriginal Education Initiative was established in 2008 in order to initiate a variety of educational projects designed to provide Aboriginal Canadians with opportunities they need to succeed. Canada's 21st Prime Minister has a remarkable record of public service, highlighted by his long and successful stewardship of Canada's finances, his leadership on environmental matters, and his commitment to the unity and diversity of our country. It's our distinct honor to have him with us. Buffy Sainte-Marie began her storied career touring North America's colleges, reservations, and concert halls in 1962. She met with both huge acclaim and huge misperception back then from audiences and record companies who expected Pocahontas and fringes. Instead, they were both entertained and educated with an initial dose of Native American reality in the first person. Miss Sainte-Marie created 18 albums of her music, 3 of her own television specials, scored movies, garnered international acclaim, and helped to found Canada's Music of Aboriginal Canada Juno category. During that time, she raised a son, earned a PhD in fine arts, taught digital music as adjunct professor at several colleges, and won an Academy Award and a Golden Globe Award for the song Up Where We Belong. Throughout this illustrious music career, Buffy Sainte-Marie has also been a beacon for human rights, justice, equity, and compassion, as you will soon see. To bring this fascinating dialogue together and to make sure each of you as CSBA Congress participants gets fully engaged in this morning's discussion, we are also joined by Amanda Lang, CBC Senior Business Correspondent and co-anchor of the Lang and O'Leary Exchange on CBC News Network. But first, an opening word. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Phil Fontaine.
Thank you, John, for a very generous introduction. Thank you. And good morning to all. I want to thank CSBA for having me here this morning. It is a long flight to get here, but it was a lot of fun. Anyway, good to be here. When I arrived here last night, I looked around for familiar faces, and indeed I came across a dear friend, the Right Honourable Paul Martin, engaged in a very interesting conversation with a number of folks from Saskatchewan, including a good friend of mine, Chief Darcy Bear from Whitecap First Nation. And the conversation covered the waterfront. We talked about poverty. We talked about Canadian history, the unknown part, for example, the War of 1812, and the role of the Indigenous people westward that had a very significant role in the War of 1812. But this is a story largely unknown to Canadians. And if it wasn't for them, as Chief Darcy Bear asserted last night, we might have been Americans, and we would have been celebrating on July the 4th. We talked about the disparity in funding education. Huge disparity between First Nations and the public school system. We talked about the enormous opportunities out there for the Aboriginal community, the tremendous potential that exists in our community, the difference that we could make if we were afforded fair opportunities, and to be actually very engaged in the positive transformation of the country, to bring Canada to what it ought to be rather than the way it is now. This wonderful country that also faces some very significant challenges. And indeed, the conversation concluded that the single most important challenge facing the country is Aboriginal poverty, and what to do about its eradication. And clearly, one of the obvious places to start. And in that regard, to build on success would be First Nations education. And quite simply put, there's been a significant upward move in terms of how First Nations, how Aboriginal people are becoming more engaged with education. From 1952, when we may have had 10 First Nation students in university in all of Canada, to today, where we have close to 30,000. Right? And of course, that means that we're making a real difference, a very positive difference. But it could be more, and it has to be more, because the number ought to be 90,000, not 30,000. And the reason for this shortfall is because of poverty, simply. The consequences of poverty, and this is what Kelowna was supposed to address. And it was about closing the gap in the quality of life between Aboriginal people and the rest of the country. And one of the focus areas was to be education. We were going to build a system that would have resulted in moving our numbers from this very significant number from 30,000 to 90,000. Of course, that didn't happen for a whole number of reasons. But that's not what I want to focus on in my time here this morning. What I want to talk to you about very briefly is the point that I made earlier about history and the fact that most Canadians, unfortunately, don't know the true Canadian history. There is so much that we don't know about each other. And that's certainly true about what we don't know about Aboriginal people. And it's impoverished our country. And what we've been doing to our children is completely unfair. Because our young people should be exposed to what Canada is really about and how it came to be, and the very important and essential role played by Aboriginal people. One of those pieces of our history that's largely unknown has to do with the residential school experience. This represents the darkest, saddest chapter in Canadian history. Sadly, most Canadians are simply not aware that this happened in Canada. Most Canadians don't know that thousands of innocent children were abused in these schools, and that the residential school experience and the policy that brought this about was designed to eradicate any sense of Indianness in the country. It is a denial of our cultures, our languages, our very history in this, our homeland. But we have an opportunity to fix that, this problem. And one of the ways that one of the things we are doing to fix this is the settlement agreement, the historic residential school settlement agreement, the largest settlement in Canadian history. And of course, a very important piece in this is the apology that was given to Aboriginal people by Prime Minister Harper on June the 11th, 2008. A watershed moment for the country. And very, very important for all Canadians. And it wasn't just about Aboriginal people. It wasn't just about the 150,000 Aboriginal students that attended residential schools in every part of the country. The apology was about all of us. It was about Canada, and it was about doing right for all of us. But one thing that isn't known, and it's an important story. Prime Minister Harper was the person that rose in the House of Commons and delivered the apology. But really the story goes back a bit. And you should be aware of what actually transpired so that you know the real story. Right? In fact, the rest of the story. The apology didn't happen. No one came in and waved the magic wand. There's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of determination. There's a whole lot of learning that went into bringing us to this very special moment, this moment for the ages. And a large part of that story was the Right Honourable Paul Martin. And so I'm going to tell you a bit about that story. You will recall the Statement of Reconciliation in January 1998. Statement of Reconciliation that spoke to the issue of the residential school experience. It wasn't an apology. There's $350 million that was announced at the same time as the Statement of Reconciliation. There's Gathering Strength initiative. And when this announcement was made, it left so many of the residential school survivors, the approximately 80,000 that were alive then, feeling somewhat denied that justice was missed. There was an opportunity to fix this problem. And I felt the same way, though I welcomed the statement and the $350 million announcement, because I thought it would make a difference. But in my heart of hearts, I knew this wasn't good enough, that we had to have more. We had to have a real apology. We had to have a true apology that recognized the role of government and the churches in this denial of one's self-worth. And so the Right Honorable Prime Minister Paul Martin became Prime Minister. And the work that we had started carried on with greater intensity, because we felt that we had someone we could work with, someone that might see the world the way we were seeing it, right? And would accept what we thought was absolutely necessary and essential to fixing this. And so we started our discussions, very intense discussions with federal government officials, ministers, and each time we went to justice officials to talk about an apology, to talk about a settlement, to talk about compensation, to talk about commemoration, to talk about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we met with great resistance. The discussions were going nowhere. We were told and reminded, as often as necessary, that we had the statement of reconciliation, we had the $350 million healing fund, and that should be enough. And I used to have these conversations. The phone would ring, and on the other line would be the Prime Minister, right? Asking me questions about the residential school experience, challenging my assertions, including why should we put money in the pockets of individuals for this residential school experience? What good would that do? Shouldn't we be putting money into education programs? Shouldn't we be building more schools? And I would argue back that this was actually very important. People ought to be compensated for the abuse that they had suffered. These innocent children that had been abused, many thousands. And this went back and forth. In fact, he went even further. One day he dropped by my office. We were on 1 Nicholas Street. There aren't too many prime ministers that just drop by the office of the national chief, right? But he showed up there, right? And we had another one of these very involved conversations. And I wasn't sure we were making any progress, because the ministers we were dealing with were still very resistant, and even more so with justice officials. And lo and behold, right, the Pope dies. John Paul II dies. And I received this call from the Prime Minister's office. Right? National Chief, would you like to be part of the Canadian delegation to the Pope's funeral? I said, my gosh, absolutely. I'd love to be there, be honored. And so off we fly to Rome, you know, the government jet, and lots of people there. And here I am, National Chief. I'm off to the Vatican for the funeral. And when we arrived there, Mr. Martin graciously invited us to dinner at this obviously fine Italian restaurant, and I'm kind of partial to Italian food. I don't think that's why he took us there. We were in Italy, so we had no choice. Anyway, so we're in the middle of this wonderful dinner. And seated to my right were an interesting cast of characters. Right beside me was Jason Kenney. Next to Jason Kenney was Rob Nicholson. Next to Rob Nicholson was Stephen Harper. And we were having this conversation, the Prime Minister and I, about the residential school experience and the settlement, compensation. And I'm making my arguments, over and over. And he's listening, he's challenging me, and I don't think the folks to my right were paying much attention to this conversation. I think they were plotting, actually. About when they returned to Canada and what they were going to do, right? Anyway, we had this conversation, and at a point, the Prime Minister said, turns to me, and Ethel Blondin was to my left. And he said, Phil, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. We're going to settle this matter. And that's all he said. We're going to do it. And so we fly back to Canada. And we begin anew these conversations. And we notice a real shift taking place. The officials were more open. They were willing to talk about a settlement package. They were willing to talk about compensation. They were willing to talk about an apology. Finally, an apology. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we were just over the moon about this, because we finally saw light. Right? We were finally going to be able to fix this in 10 minutes. Yeah. And the story then, became about all of this, right? And the word became, actually, and then the Pope died. And the Pope died, and then the Pope died, right? Which meant to say that the Prime Minister had resolved this issue in his mind, and he had issued instructions to his officials, cabinet, that ministers were responsible for this, that we had to do this. Right? And we did, as you know, the largest settlement in Canadian history, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the apology. That was really, in large part, to do what Paul Martin speaks to the tremendous spirit and heart of this fine gentleman. And that's the rest of the story, actually. And thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you very much, Phil, for that incredible reminder of the way things happen, the way change happens. Change rarely happens at once, in one moment. But we have two people here today who have been part of a process of change and who continue to be and have made huge contributions. I'm delighted to be here to try to help engage a conversation. We want to hear their thoughts. And as you may know, we also want to really put you to work. You're involved in education, and so you understand that part of the best way to engage your brain in something is actually be forced to be accountable. So there's going to be, as you may know, after we have a little dialogue up here, a 30-minute period where you're going to be asked to, as a group of 10, your table, to discuss amongst yourselves the question you would like to ask. And after we've done that, and we'll wander the room and go from table to table during that period to try to help you engage, we're going to call on some of you to ask that question. So that's coming. Education, I think everybody in this room is here because we respect and understand the value of it. One story for me that illustrates it beautifully is I anchor a show called The Lang and O'Leary Exchange. My co-host is a very bombastic person. That's a very nice adjective, isn't it? And I'm sometimes asked how we came up with the name of the show, specifically how I got my name first. And I tell the very true story, which is that we had a show meeting, and I said in quite typical diplomatic fashion that if my name didn't go first, I wouldn't do the show. To which O'Leary replied, well, why don't we just make it alphabetical? I'm going to ask both, and please forgive me, I was raised in a household where literally my older sister said to me, never do anything you wouldn't do in front of God, the Prime Minister, or Mummy. In that order, so it's very difficult for me to call him Paul in front of all of you, but because Buffy is a superstar, she gets called Buffy by everybody. So I'm going to say Buffy and Paul, so with respect to both of them, and forgive me for it. I'm going to ask each of them to kind of set the table of why they're here, where their heart and mind is on this issue. And Buffy, I'm going to ask you to begin.
Thank you, Amanda. And thank you to CSBA. Thank you most of all to our Creator, creativity, our creation, including the creation of our works in the arts, our works in government, in our families from day to day. Back in the 1960s, I was very passionate and sometimes quite loud about some of the things that Chief Fontaine just told you about, including the residential schools, but also about education. Thank you for the introduction this morning, but what you might not know is that before all that, before I was a singer, I was a teacher. My first college degree was in education. My second was in Oriental philosophy, and my third was in fine arts. So education has been important to me from the very beginning. And as an Aboriginal person raised outside of the Aboriginal community, it's given me, that might seem like a hard position. No, that has given me an opportunity to appear on the great stages of Europe and Asia and Down Under and North America. But also, with the airplane tickets that I got in show business, I got to go to the reserves, the reservations, the indigenous communities of the world. This has given me the opportunity to experience living on the bridge among cultures. And it's been an amazing, amazing experience. Also to, in the 1960s, I was a young singer with too much money. And what I did with my leftover singing money was really obvious to me. I started a scholarship foundation, the Nihiwan Foundation for Native American Education. Now this was in 1968. Later on, we also achieved Revenue Canada status, but that's a little bit later. And although I'm proud of the things that you mentioned this morning, thank you, Anne-Marie, the proudest moment for me came not in receiving an Academy Award, but about 15 years ago, when I went to a meeting of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and the person who had founded that organization announced to me that he had been one of the earliest scholarship recipients for my foundation. So here I was traveling around in the world, knowing how things were on the reserves. What Phil said is dead accurate. Poverty keeps people from going to college. So also does networking. So I found out that people on the reserves in indigenous communities throughout the world simply didn't have the networking to get them from where they were at into colleges. So I started a scholarship foundation, and then just 15 years ago I found out that 2 of my scholarship recipients had gone on to become the presidents of tribal colleges. This is very important. How can you have a tribal college Native studies is just about how the white man screwed the Indian. No, it is not. It is not. Native education is not just about history, it's about everything. Later on, I expanded the Nihiwan Foundation beyond scholarships, and I started something called the Cradle Board Teaching Project. Now, this was after I had been on Sesame Street for 5.5 years, and my son was in grade 5, and his teacher came to me. We're already living in Hawaii. She came to me, this teacher in a multicultural school, and she said, I'm required by law to teach a Native Studies unit. And I know it's baloney, these materials that I have. And I looked at her materials, and indeed they were baloney. They were the same junk that they were trying to teach with when I was a kid. Really, it was very shallow, it was very narrow, it wasn't accurate, and it was boring. Those same old pictures of Chief Joseph M. Sitting Bull, just very much nothing. So I put on my teacher's hat again, after having been in show business quite a few years. And I started to write a Native curriculum. And no matter what I wrote for the first couple of years, trying to, help these teachers out, it all sounded like dead text about dead Indians. And what I wanted to give the kids was something like I would experience on the reserve. The kids in these grade 5 and 6 classes, I wanted to give them the experience of knowing Native children. These are kids in Hawaii, so I connected them with a school that my cousin at Star Blanket Reserve in Saskatchewan, at File Hills, was running, Star Blanket School. All of a sudden it became alive. We were connecting kids on the internet in the 80s, before anybody even knew that there was an internet. There were only a few people on the internet in the 80s, and we were some of them. We were connecting kids in Saskatchewan with kids in Hawaii. What we did was we put Native educators, communities, and kids, students, into the driver's seat of delivering Aboriginal self-identity from that local community to their partner kids, long distance, in this case in Hawaii. The Kellogg Foundation heard about this and gave us a big grant, through which we were able to model this accurate, enriching curriculum delivered by a partnering system between a reserve and a remote non-Indian school. And we ran it for many, many years. We modeled the project in the US, and here comes the good part. You know me, I always manage to slip a whole lot of Canadian content into the curriculum, even though we were mandated to serve American kids first by the various American grants that we got. Okay, now it's later. Now we're in Canada. Those grants in the US have expired. The good news is that we were able to model the project, to work the bugs out, to guinea pig the project in the US to make sure that it worked. And now here we are in Canada. And what I'd like to tell you about is what's going on right now with the Nihiwan Foundation. We're working with the University of British Columbia, we're working with the University of Saskatchewan, we're starting to work with the University of Winnipeg, and we're definitely working with First Nations University in Regina. But not in the way that I described the project worked in the US. It's a little bit different. And the news is very, very good, because when we were doing it in the US, Canada wasn't ready. It was before Truth and Reconciliation. It was before people knew how to use computers. I mean, I can't tell you what a hard sell this was. Indians and computers, that's never gonna work, right? People just didn't understand either computers or Aboriginal people. So what we accomplished in the US has become a model for something in the world of curriculum. There's nothing like this anywhere I don't mean just in Aboriginal education, where usually you're talking about dream catchers and beads and feathers and, oh, the Indians were and that Indian was, always in the past. No, what we modeled was science through Native American eyes. Science doesn't have any ethnicity. How come it's always presented as though the Greeks invented it? Greeks didn't invent science. Any society that has survived invented science. It's a big thought, but think about it. We were teaching, for instance, in the Principles of Sound, which we put out as an interactive multimedia DVD, we were teaching the principles of sound, frequency and amplitude, hertz, and all the science behind sound. We were teaching it through an Aboriginal perspective. Frequency and amplitude have no ethnicity. But how were you when you were in grade 6 trying to learn the difference between those two things? Sesame Street, I know how to do things in 3.5 minutes. Brief, concise. I'm a recording artist. If you're going to teach the kids frequency and amplitude, why don't you just give them little interactive sliders? So the student has her hand on the mouse. This is multisensory learning. She raises the slider when she's in the section on frequency, and she sees that the wave is coming slowly and fast and slow and fast. And as she's going up and down, the sound is going, ooh, ooh. Oh, it's coming more frequently. I see, okay. Amplitude, what's that? Oh, the pitch is going to sound the same when you raise the slider. So the student has his hand on the slider, and it's going, wow, 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 yeah? So multisensory learning is just a better tool. Why can't we be using it in Aboriginal education? And why can't this become a model for all education? It can. So, at First Nations University, we're building some new curriculum through the Cradle Board Teaching Project. Cradle Board has gone into teacher education. What we can do, what we're planning to do at UBC, Saskatchewan, First Nations, and hopefully the University of Winnipeg, plus the other 6 colleges who have in the past several years given me honorary PhDs. You might think it's about music. It's not. It's about education. Educators in colleges across Canada are excited. They want to do Aboriginal curriculum properly. They just plain don't know how to do it. They don't quite have the knack. They're not quite there. This model can do it. Teachers don't want to teach bad math. Teachers, believe me, don't want to teach bad Aboriginal studies either. They don't want it to be inaccurate. They want it to be exciting. Teachers themselves are bored. So what we're doing right now is we go to a university and we can teach a university how to do cross-discipline collaborations that result in 2 products. One product is curriculum units in any field created by the university, working with their own teacher candidates and instructors and professors, based in the cultural perceptions, perspectives, and input of their own local Aboriginal communities. It's so flexible, it works anywhere. It's not hard, and universities are loving it. I would urge you to consider the fact that not only are Aboriginal people ready for these new models, but so are universities. They're eager to do a great job. With the technology that used to be hard, it has become easy. So we're teaching teachers, teacher candidates, universities, instructors, professors, and kids how to create interactive, multimedia, cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary curriculum units that an emerging teacher, a teacher candidate, can then take into his or her practice teaching in the fall. This is the way to reach the little kids who just plain want, need, and are receptive to learning. To teach teachers by using great tools, making things easier, not harder for them, and to truly involve both the universities and the local, provincial, band, Aboriginal people who happen to live there. We can do this.
Paul?
I'm under a lot of pressure here. For a number of reasons. First of all, yesterday when I left home, before I came here, I was talking to 2 of my sons, and they said, "What are you doing in Quebec City?" And I told them that I was going to be up here with Amanda Lang and Buffy Sainte-Marie. And of course, the first thing they said, my sons, "You with Amanda Lang?" Every night, we watch her beat up on that guy. And she said, "You know, Dad, you're not as swift as you once were." You know, and And then I sort of, to get my way out, I said, and they said, what are you doing with Buffy Sainte-Marie? And I said, we're going to do a gig. And they said, Dad, you can't carry a tune. And I said, but that's fine. Listen, Buffy Sainte-Marie, we are really going to be a team. And they said, oh, they called their mother, they called my wife, and they said, don't let him go. And then I sit here, and I mean, and then we've all heard Amanda, and it's just so terrific. And then I've got to tell you something. Buffy Sainte-Marie is known, certainly for her musical skills and for what she has given to the country. I got to tell you, the last 10 minutes was just simply amazing. And think about that. I don't think there was very many. Now the second, or the third thing, reason I'm under a lot of pressure, is that we came up here knowing we were going to talk for 10 minutes, and I basically had a set piece. And Phil Fontaine's just destroyed the whole thing. So I am going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk about one project that we are involved in, and I'm going to talk about the importance of the school boards, but I'm going to put it in a different context. I'm going to put it in the context that Phil raised in his remarks up here. First of all, I can tell you that when you're the Minister of Finance or whether you're Prime Minister, you spend a lot of time with a lot of people. And you get you get people who are coming to you with one idea or another, or you meet prime ministers or presidents from other countries. I've got to tell you, in terms of understanding, in terms of leadership and setting a sense of direction, Phil Fontaine is really one of the most important people I have ever dealt with in politics. And I think that's people. But I want to pick up on something, because what he described to you was the discussions between the two of us not over whether there should be money paid. It was over the way in which the money should be paid and where it would go. And we had profound debates between the two of us on that issue. And in the end, it was Phil's vision which won out. And it won out essentially because he was right, and I think that the history in the last couple of years has demonstrated that he was right as Canadians are beginning to understand what truly happened. But I think something else happened, and it really happened, I think, throughout the Cologne process, in which for the first time, I think, in the history of this country, the Prime Minister, the provincial premiers, territorial leaders, and the Aboriginal leadership of this country, beginning with the Grand Chief, sat around the table in a position of equality. And I think we've got to understand what that means. Phil talked about the residential school issue. There's no doubt that in the minds of a great number of well-meaning teachers at that time, it was done as a question of education, of helping young people. But when you begin to read some of the papers that were provided by the Government of Canada at that time, let there be no doubt that what this also was, in fact, what I should say what this was a sophisticated attempt at assimilation of a people who for 300 years have resisted it, and thank God they have, because we are now going to be the stronger country because of it. But this wasn't the first attempt at assimilation. Assimilation has been the inevitable tool of colonizing powers in every part of the world. The basic mantra of colonization is because we have got a bigger army, because we have got a stronger economy, because we are on your shores, no matter where they happen to be. I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and it's exactly the same mantra. The mantra of colonization is everything that we believe is good and everything you believe is bad, is irrelevant, and it's out of the way. And the reason that that's the case is we're here. and our armies are here, and we have guns that shoot. And that's effectively what has dominated the history of this country up until quite recently. And that's what Kelowna tried to change. You've got to understand this. It was, we will tell you what you need to do. We will tell you what you need to know. And what Phil Fontaine really changed, and in the Kelowna discussions what really changed, was he told us what had to be done. And we sat down to try to work that out. Not saying you're right, but basically the initiative came from the Aboriginal leadership in the country. And I believe that that is so fundamental to our success, because what it recognizes is that the First Nations, the Inuit and the Métis of this country come from a different tradition, come from values that are different, not worse, not better, not worse, but there are many of them that are different. Anybody who looks at the way most of our kids look at elders, and then take a look at the respect that the First Nations have for their elders, understands that there are things that we can learn here and that we should follow. And so that discussion between Phil and I in terms of the residential schools, in which he gives me far more credit than I deserve, was really a sense of coming to grips with the fact that if this country is going to operate, then we are going to have to be prepared, and we should, in our own benefit, that's when he talked about Canadians, listen to what the youngest and the fastest growing segment of our population has to say. So now let me just put that into context. I wanted to be here to talk to you, representatives of the school boards across the country, because if you're doing what I'm doing, what Lucy Santoro from our initiative is doing with me and the others who were involved with us, the school boards play the absolutely crucial role. It is the school boards who determine whether the principals and the teachers within your boards are going to work with us, are going to support us, who understand what we want to do, and we cannot do it. We cannot do it without the school boards. And so that was why I wanted to be here, and why I was going to go through a long list of what we wanted to do until Bill threw me off course. But essentially, and that's much what Buffy had to say when she talked to you about the way she sees all of this. Let me just give you an example of what we're doing and why I think that working with you is so important. When we first started, we had to face up to the very high dropout rates. And there was a program developed in the United States by a young teacher in inner city Manhattan, in which he basically said, when you're dealing with dropouts, if you start to teach them about business, they'll stay in school because they'll find business, the opportunity to put jingle in their pockets, a lot more attractive than learning geography or geometry. But the fact is, they'll stay in school and they'll learn geography and geometry. The fact, we went down, we took their course. The course is now in some 14 countries, United Kingdom, Ireland, Israel. We took their course, and we brought it back, we married it with the best business courses we could find in all of the provincial curricula across the country, because we wanted to get a high school credit for our course. And we introduced it into a reserve in Thunder Bay, a reserve dealing with kids living up and down the coast of Hudson Bay and Thunder Bay. It had a huge success. Within the first couple of years, graduation rates started to go up, the kids' interest started to go up, because what you were essentially dealing with was kids that knew nothing about entrepreneurship, kids who knew nothing about business, for whom this was totally new. And when you told those kids, you know, that they came from societies for which time immemorial had engaged in trade, when you told those kids that those trading ranges range from the farthest reaches of the north to mid Latin America, and when you told them that the archaeological foundings were there, these kids were amazed. When we said to them, don't you think, you can be business people, you can do this. I tell you, the change in those kids became tremendous. So after over a period of time, as the course went on, we began to expand. I called the premiers of the Western provinces. I find when you're a former prime minister, they return your phone call once. And we began to expand. And the course was really doing very well. And then one day, somebody said to us, you know, your examples are American. We had taken the course, and then we brought in the Ontario and the other provinces stuff before we went into this one Ontario school. And then we hired an Ojibwe teacher who took the course and essentially adapted it to the community from which she came. But then, as we started going on, somebody said, you know, you've taken this from other jurisdictions, and you're talking to First Nations kids primarily, because we were doing this on reserve, but you're going to be dealing with Inuit, you're going to be dealing with the Métis, and you're not reflecting their traditions. And so what we asked 2 of our teachers to take a year off, and we said, start the course from scratch. And they went back, they talked to Aboriginal business people, they took their examples, and we now have, and have been using for the last year and a half, the first set of Indigenous workbooks and textbooks for grades 11 and 12 business courses, the first courses ever written by Indigenous people for Indigenous people anywhere in the world. And the course has taken off. The course has taken off. The results among the kids is evident. Because all of a sudden, what are they dealing with? They're dealing with their own, they're dealing with something in which they are familiar. And we were all last night at that discussion with people from Saskatchewan who seemed to like Quebec beer. And we had a tremendous discussion about what this can mean. And the only point that I really want to make is that we have taken this one business course, and it is now an Aboriginal business course. And I believe that it has the opportunity to take over. It will only happen if you, the representatives of the school boards who are in this room, make it happen. And I very much hope that will occur. But the fundamental point is, and I will close on simply one example. When I started in the business world, I worked for a company which some of you might have heard of called Power Corporation, and I was in the investment side. And they decided they were going to send me to Japan for a month. And what they said was, before you go to Japan, you better understand something, that these people, face is very important to them. They operate by consensus. And they gave me a 3-week course in what it is like to understand the values and the traditions of a different people. Well, I'll tell you, I've talked to a lot of business people who deal with the First Nations, with the Métis, and the Inuit. And I don't think very many of them give their people courses, and people have look at things in a different way, have different values, and different traditions. Not worse values, better values in so many cases. We don't maybe no attempt to understand. But if you have spent, and I know that there so many of you in this room have, when you begin to spend the time with the first peoples of this country, you understand that what makes us so much richer than the Europeans is that we came to a land where people had been since time immemorial. And finally, we are beginning to understand what a benefit that is to each and every one of us. Thank you.
I'm sorry that we don't have any inspirational thoughts for you. The truth is, from both of these two people, I'm reminded that the people in the world throughout history that actually make the big changes are the ones that aren't daunted by big problems. And Paul is reminding us that he's also focused on Africa. It's so easy to think of Aboriginal issues, the poverty, the cycle of despair, the social issues. Assimilation was surely the easy way out. And think of it as a problem that's just so big. So let's drill down a little bit into some of those kind of key issues, and we've identified these themes. Transforming Canada, this is an opportunity, right? This is a population that is an opportunity for this country. It's young, it's fast growing, but we've failed it. Poverty's endemic. Education is not part of much of the kind of fabric of families. Let's start there. chicken and egg. Buffy, I want you to start. I mean, you've got to get the kids to school. You've got to get the parents engaged before we break the cycle of poverty. How do we do it?
The one very important thing is self-esteem in the individual child and the teachers who are with that individual child. With Aboriginal people, we haven't been given the information that raises self-esteem. There's a lot of real connection to solid evidence. For instance, raising self-esteem in the Aboriginal community, little kids, middle kids, big kids, teachers. We have hockey season, we have baseball season, football season. Does anybody ever tell kids that team sports were invented on this side of the water? The Greeks didn't have team sports. Team sports were only found in the Americas. Team sports were invented by the Mayans, who also invented the rubber ball. The Mayans were connected with people in Canada, throughout the Americas. There's just not a sense in the hearts and minds of the Aboriginal person of value, of what we have already contributed. 2/3 of the world's food sources. It was not wild, we were not, though there were a few Indians wandering around picking berries, eating wild corn. No, corn, potatoes, beans, squash, they were hybridized by people on this side of the water, cultivated. Columbus reported seeing cornfields 18 miles long. But why don't you know this? Why don't Aboriginal kids know it? Why don't their teachers know it? Why don't colleges know it? The information is there, and this is the good work that we have to do. It's exciting. It's fun. We can put some juice into Canadian education in this kind of project. The Greeks did not invent everything. a lot of the good things that we could be using to raise self-esteem, which of course is only a partial answer, but that's the part that I'm going to focus on. For instance, I told you about frequency and amplitude in the Cradle Board Teaching Project. We followed that up with a study of Aboriginal musical instruments. See, frequency and amplitude science doesn't have any ethnicity. So why, in the study of sound, why do we only focus on things like pianos and tubas and Beethoven? Yeah? We let kids know the science behind, well, why is it that a drum changes pitch when you put it over a fire or a light bulb, when you apply heat or sunlight? Why does it change pitch? We don't teach kids how to play a flute with their, with an animation of fingers covering the holes of a flute. We're not teaching them how to play the flute. We're teaching them, why does the pitch change when you place your fingers here, here, and here? You're lengthening and shortening the column of air by the device, the flute that you're using, see? And then we follow that up with traditional and contemporary music from Aboriginal communities. So you see how this can be a joyful part of truth and reconciliation. What has been denied to all of us through not only the residential schools and the kids who had to go there, but people like me who were simply kidnapped or adopted without the benefit of papers, sent across the border or far, far away. Our generations, there was genocide in this country. Part of truth and reconciliation is accepting that, realizing it, and trying real hard to bring out the best in everybody. Because what we're doing in improving Aboriginal education is not just feeling sorry for those poor little Indian kids. What we're offering is additional options in studying science, history, geography to everybody. So that the non-Indian student, too, is receiving additional options. You get a little bit of culture along with your pure science. So the part that I want to focus on your question, Amanda, has to do with self-esteem. It's good. It's joyful work. I think that's something that you'll be glad to bring to your schools, to your parents, and to your kids and your communities. What would you say?
On the question of parental involvement, I don't think there's any doubt that parental involvement is absolutely essential, and I think that a lot of the writing has said actually that the single most important thing that a parent can do is when the child comes home after school to just simply say, how did it go at school? Just to show some kind of interest. It is, from my point of view, I think it's probably one of the single most important issues that we have to address to get the kids, to get the parents involved. The fact of the matter is, not only within Aboriginal communities, but within all, especially, we put it bluntly, in lower income communities, it is a huge problem. I mean, we all understand the real fundamental problem with education is the richer you are, the more your kids read at home, get a better education, and then their kids are richer and their kids are richer, and we get this massive inequality. And it is the responsibility of government, of school boards, and all of us, in fact, where our society isn't going to collapse around our ears, to start to collapse that inequality. And the only way you do it, the fundamental way you do it, is through education. I have spoken to Aboriginal educators across the country, and what most of them seem to say to me is that it has to begin with early learning. In other words, if when a baby is born, you begin to do, with the mother and the father, you begin to do early learning for that baby, and that goes through, which means that mother and father will take an interest in that child, not just in the child, but that child's education from day one all the way up into grade 4 or 5. You will deal with the question of criminal involvement. And what they have said to me is there are no shortcuts, that you have got to do that. I mean, but you know, the fact is there are more experts in this room on this issue. I would hope maybe I think it's a big issue, maybe when you're doing the consideration, some of you can take a look at what Buffy has said and perhaps what I've been told about early learning.
You both have explored great ideas, great opportunities. You, I think, both have kind of prescriptions that you can offer. I'm curious for your take on the biggest impediments you've encountered. And some of them would be structural, just sort of the, I don't know whether it's because it's a provincial system or, whether it's right down at the school board level, but Buffy, where's the kind of biggest stopgap in actually making big, good changes on this front?
Well, I think you just said it very well. People want to do it better and people don't quite know how. But it's good to be able to say that. Yeah, because I think that we can do it. I know that Cradle Board has been working for many, many years up against that very problem. That's why in Cradle Board Canada, that's why we're starting with teacher training. Because you can have a great curriculum, but unless you can get it implemented into the schools at a level for which there's genuine enthusiasm, I don't care how good the curriculum is. It won't show up. It'll just be another extra. But see, what you have to have is the content. You can't just have the wish. You have to have the content. But Aboriginal people, we do have the content for presenting core curriculum studies of all kinds that is infused with what Aboriginal people have contributed or are contributing to. Something that First Nations University is beginning is very interesting and very kind of brass tacks, nails, income related, business related curriculum. They're working with this program called I-Team, which has to do with mining. And Aboriginal people are sometimes the ones who are doing the shoveling, right? But everybody else is on the board, right? They have no role in the business or the executive side of it. So what First Nations is doing and what Cradle Board is going to be helping with by helping to make what they're doing child-friendly for schools. They're taking on mining by way of a business track and a technology track. And if Aboriginal people understand both the technology and the business side of it and are trained in a 1-year certificate program, a 2-year certificate program, a 4-year program, a master's program, to really go forward in the mining industry from all their various points of view, you have some content going on that is rooted in true Aboriginal perspectives. They know what they're talking about. They know about Protect Mother Earth, and they also know about using resources wisely, both widely and wisely. So I think what we need to do is focus on, number one, on content. And number two, on implementing it properly, and in our case, we're doing it from the university level. Because if the universities understand it, and emerging teachers understand it, and if it's being, if it's true to core values, for instance, in the case of science, if it's true to scientific principles, at the same time is coming through an Aboriginal perspective, then I think you have it all. I think we can do it.
It's a bit of a trap, not that you do that, but the fact is that obviously there are so many major obstacles, and to sort of pick one over another gets you into a discussion, but I don't think there's any doubt that one of the major ones is the underfunding of education. I think we know the numbers. I mean, fundamentally, on-reserve education by the federal government is anywhere from 20 to 30% underfunded as compared to the provinces. What the provinces are spending, and nobody says that in fact the provinces are spending everything that they should. So you begin with that. Then when you add to that the greater number of kids with disabilities, the absolute necessity to play catch up. I mean, if you've had a system that has been underfunded for 100 years, you're not going to simply turn that around in the next day. So I believe that, and again, I think this is where on the national debate level, the school boards are so important. I think that we have got to deal with the issue of the underfunding of Aboriginal education. I don't think there's any way around it. No matter, we can change everything we want to change, but if they can't afford to pay teachers adequately, if they can't have science labs, then they're going to be constantly falling behind. The more you fall behind, in fact, the greater the need for catch-up and the harder it is.
We're going to turn it over to you guys, and with permission, I'm going to truncate your 30 minutes to more like 15, I think, just to keep us up. You can do it. But before we do that, just one quick question on the role of business, because business can play a big role in funding, in content, but it's something that educators often resist. Paul, what's your thought on sort of the role business can and should play?
Oh, I think it's absolutely crucial. I think that we've got to recognize that this is one area where there is actually, I think, a geographical difference. Most businesses, I mean, the Aboriginal population in Western Canada is so much greater that most businesses in Eastern Canada, unless they're in the natural resource area, the mining companies as an example, they will not have that level of understanding. But one of the good things that has come out of my own involvement in Western Canada is there is, I find, in the oil and gas companies and in the great mining companies, at the vice presidential level, because they have had to deal with this issue, a large number of very knowledgeable and very sympathetic people. Many of them are Aboriginal themselves, with PhDs and highly educated. Many of them are not. But there is a level of knowledge there which I think that we can tap into. That's primarily the Western Canadian phenomenon.
TD just appointed a VP of Aboriginal Affairs, so steps in the right direction. Just a reminder of how this is going to work. You're going to establish who is your animator, who's going to be your person to get the discussion going. Your reporter is the person who will actually stand up and ask the question when we get to that, and somebody should keep time. So what we're going to ask is that you take 15 minutes, which puts you at 5 to 11. We're going to wander the room. Paul and Buffy will come to various tables, and you can ask them anything you like to help you get to a discussion. Pick, if you will, one of those 4 themes. You see the 4 themes. We want you to really focus and drill down. And the point of this exercise is, how do they help you?
Great fun.
works quite well that will flow into lunch and you can keep these conversations going. I can tell you that we had to use a crowbar to get the Prime Minister away from one table, get him talking about education, and he doesn't really want to stop. Let's get to your questions. I actually, as I wondered about, found that there are two themes that kept emerging, so I'll be interested to see what we find here in terms of kind of what you folks want to know. So I'm going to kind of randomly, unless you want to hop up to the microphones, there's one there and there's one there. There you go. And I may also randomly call on tables, so anything about that. We've got about 20 minutes here, so I'm going to ask you to keep your questions fairly concise, and we're going to keep the answers fairly concise because we want to see if we can get through as many as possible. We may not get to everybody. So let's go over here.
I guess good day. My thanks to all of our speakers this morning for their words. It's been very inspirational and thought-provoking, and of course guilt-inspiring as a board member. We in our group, which is, as we say, Saskatchewan and Ontario United, we looked at the theme of stimulating parental involvement in difficult social and economic conditions. And I guess we went around a lot. We talked about a number of things and connections and trust, and we were able to distill it down to this one question. And we're directing this to you, Buffy. We would like to know, what are the ways that we as a school boards can connect through the generations to support and encourage the elders, the grandparents, and the parents in terms of supporting their kids in school?
Thank you. I think it's very, very important when you're dealing with people that you're trying to reach in that group. I think you need to focus on content. I think that many, many people are just thunderstruck by what Truth and Reconciliation has revealed, sometimes in their own lives that they've never even been able to talk about. And certainly from outside the Native community, we have people who are just thunderstruck that this ever could have happened to anybody, anywhere, let alone Canada. You know, we do have genocide basic to our history. We do. And we're having a hard time dealing with it. I think one of the things that we really, really need to do is when you're dealing with parents and the community and Aboriginal kids and teachers, you have to tell them what they should be proud of. It's not enough to say, you should be proud of your culture. Do you know what that says to somebody like me? Nothing. It's not enough. So I think that as members of school boards, I think you owe it to yourself, the treat of filling in some of those blanks. I'm going to recommend a book to you that I think every one of you will really enjoy. It's called Indian Givers by Jack Weatherford. And it's full of positive contributions that Native people have made. I think that it will raise your own self-esteem in being knowledgeable. I think it's something that you can pass on to the community through parents and teachers. But there's a danger that we have right now as we're finally dealing with Truth and Reconciliation. The danger is that everybody gets locked into victimization. With the Cradleboard Teaching Project, we have something, Cradleboard.org, by the way, is our website. It's very tiny at the moment because we're concentrating on teacher training in Canada and we're not ripe there yet. So we still have some curriculum that we used in the US. But there's a document in our supplement section called, I think it's called Making Things Better, Guilt and Bitterness. I want to give you a little metaphor. Guilt and bitterness, you know, teachers would come to me and they'd say, I don't think that I can qualify for your project because I don't know anything about Indian people, right? Some of these teachers are Aboriginal teachers, right? There's not enough content, there's not enough stuff to be knowledgeable about that's in circulation now. I think that's what you can stimulate. The metaphor is Native people out on the plains and they're picking up stuff and putting it in a bag. And you say to the kids or the teachers, okay, what are they picking up? And they'll say, oh, wood or food. No, they're picking up dried buffalo chips, manure, right? The stuff that you're supposed to throw away. They'll say, throw away that guilt. Get over that bitterness. No, You reduce, reuse, recycle. You take that dried buffalo chips, you bring it home to your community. With dried buffalo chips, you can make a fire. That's a survival tool. That's your guilt and your bitterness. You can turn it into something else. You can create heat. You can create the light of day. That's something that only human people can do. That's something only we can do. Or you can use it as fertilizer for something else. But this is what you're dealing with at the heart of it. Is people who want to help don't know how. They need to get knowledgeable. Jack Weatherford's Indian Givers will give you a start in helping them to explore more, to contribute more, to know more. Does that help? I hope.
I want to actually, one of the themes in this room is parental engagement. It's something that a lot of the different tables are concerned with, and I know the Peel board was along the same lines. Not all of the school boards have an issue of parental engagement that focuses on Aboriginals, First Nations. Parental engagement, I think, is a pretty important issue. So, I mean, I don't know if either of you want to, I know it's a big issue, but if either of you want to hit it quickly, what's the kind of root into, regardless, because sometimes it's impoverished young Black Canadians, sometimes it can be any group at all, but that is a big theme here. Paul, any thoughts about how you get the parents on board?
Well, I think I've already said in the earlier one that I think the fundamental issue is if you have early learning and that you can focus on early learning, then you can use a substantial portion of that time to get the parents involved and to get them there. If you talk to a lot of parents, they will tell you about the fear factor of going to a school, the fear factor of being shut down, and I think you've got to deal with that there. But there are other things. One of the groups asked me the question, and I put out a suggestion which they are trying in certain parts of the United States. I put it out very hesitantly because I wasn't sure how well it would be received, and it actually was. And that is there are parts in the southern United States where they're actually paying the parents to come to school. And the reason is not that they want to do this on a longer term basis, but what they've got to do, they've got to break this logjam of them never going. So if they get them to go at the beginning, then maybe in fact what they can do is to build up. I don't think it's an attractive suggestion, but let me tell you, if the alternative is no parental involvement, then I think it's something that's got to be thought about.
Out here at the microphone.
Okay. Thank you for joining us today and coming out and leading this very important conversation. I think, as you can see, everyone's very interested in it, so thank you. My question is, a lot of this comes down to, and it's already been identified, that funding is a key issue, and that particularly in reserve schools, the funding is 25-30% lower than in our provincially funded schools. And it's easy to point the finger at the federal government and say just pay more, but I think that there's probably political will to do that, but it's not happening. So instead of pointing fingers, my question is, the provinces do education relatively well, I believe. The federal government seems to have proven that it doesn't do education well in reserves, at least from a funding perspective. What's the political and/or constitutional impediment to simply making Aboriginal education a provincial jurisdiction?
A super easy question. Thank you.
You want me to take it?
Yep.
Well, the first thing is that the First Nations, in fact, all of the Aboriginal, the First Nations and the primarily, however, have got a constitutional right to a chunk of money coming out of the federal government, and they're not sure, and to be quite honest, with some justification, that if in fact that was shifted to provinces, that same responsibility would flow. That was the reason for Kelowna. The single biggest reason for Kelowna was that the feds had responsibility on reserve and the responsibility to fund it properly. But the feds it isn't a question you can blame the feds. There is no education department in Ottawa. They have no responsibility. They have no understanding, no background. And that's the way our Constitution is. So they don't have responsibility for education, but they do have this responsibility for Aboriginal funding. What Kelowna did was to say, and this did it as a result of the request coming from the three Aboriginal leaders, major Aboriginal leaders, is we will work with the provinces who have got the expertise on condition that you, the feds, guarantee the funding and the increased funding. That was Kelowna, and we put $1.2 billion over 5 years. I don't want to be part, well, I do want to be partisan, but I'm not going to be. That's what the government walked away from. They walked away from $1.2 billion to bring the funding up to the exact level. And the reason we didn't go beyond that is that everybody wanted to see how it was going to work out. I think if you got into a constitutional debate, it would, you would get nowhere.
Thank you.
Good morning. The Sir Wilfrid Laurier School Board has 3 schools where Aboriginal students attend. Attendance and school success, particularly at the high school, are problematic. The best indicators of school success is the mother's level of education. We have 2 questions. What type of adult or vocational education programs do your projects encompass? And second, we are more than anxious to start up an Aboriginal Studies program, as Ms. Sainte-Marie said. We don't know how. Would you be able to have resources made available to schools, adult centers, and school boards to assist us in implementing such programs?
The answer is yes, I hope so. It's very nice to see people from Wilfrid Laurier. Yes, this is something that Cradle Board Canada does want to go ahead with. We're very young, we're very new at it. But in talking with people from Wilfrid Laurier, from Teacher Education Department at Wilfrid Laurier, I know that there is an enthusiasm for this. You can contact me at buffy@cradleboard.org, and the information will be, your address will be forwarded to someone named Linda Harris at our offices, and we can send you a multi-page document that kind of describes the way we're going about it. And I should mention also that one of the reasons why we can be successful where people in public education will have a harder time is that we're private, see? I mean, for the first, 20, 30 years, it was only my singing money. You know, I never even had anybody else helping. And then we got private funding. We have never taken any public funding or any funding from a university or a school. But this is good, see? There are people like me out there. The private sector is interested as well, so that's good. You asked particularly about adult education. What we decided to do at the very beginning in creating the Cradle Board Teaching Project, in the first place, we were never about money. And as one of the real key founders and builders of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, said, the information wants to be free. So everything that we put out, we give it away for free. And so long as money is not the impediment, things can go forward. But sometimes, of course we all understand, money is an impediment, as we all know. So you do have partners on the other side who are not depending upon, for their salaries. We really, really do want to tackle this. So get in touch with us. We'll send you the way that we're doing it at universities. Of course, we too, Paul answered a business question earlier, much better than I could, but we do have people in business who are interested in supporting the kind of thing that we're doing. But just to try to be clear about it, even though we're private, we are at the disposal of other educators wherever they come from, and I truly appreciate your understanding of how vital the colleges and universities of Canada are to going ahead, to converting the victimization into true triumph and more understanding for everybody, not only Aboriginal people, but everybody, to get in touch with us.
Now, with the deepest apologies, we're going to run out of time. We probably have time for one more question over here. What I'm going to do is ask a question, again, with apologies, I hope I get it as right for as many of you as possible, but a theme that is definitely alive in this room is the sense of impotence by school boards, that they're trapped in the middle, that the teachers have access to the problems and ideas about innovation, and the school board could implement it,
but they live in a world where the province rules. Is this a question that we should ask these guys? The province then is this sort of bureaucratic structure. They have to go, and it takes too long, and there's ignorance, and there's, so I want both of you to kind of, it seemed like a big theme here. Probably not one we can solve today any more than the constitutional question, but because both of you actually can make a difference in stuff like this, the structural problems of how we educate and how we can innovate.
I have the same question, so I'm going to defer to Paul. No, the way that I tackle it is by not letting money get in the way. I don't wait for the money, I go out and do it. Then the money follows. See, but I can do that. Some of you guys can't do that. So really, I ask the same question. I recognize that in every province, everybody knows that this is a problem. So, Paul, you got any ideas? You used to like me, huh? Aw.
Well, two things. First of all, you really are quite smart. When I was Prime Minister, when they would ask a question in the House of Commons and I couldn't answer it, I'd just look over at the minister and smile. And say, "Get up." So, I mean, is this the final thing? Or
I think we'll have time for one more after this.
Okay. I think I actually challenged the question, although there was quite a lot of applause. But this is what you're talking about is the impotence of school boards. I have got to tell you that I have not found that. We've got schools on literacy. We're going into. We've got all of our business programs, which look like they're going to be expanding, and we have done it all because of the school boards. In fact, the school boards have been the single most important supporter that we have had. The provinces have been terrific, but all that the provinces have done is said they will give us the high school credit, as an example. But we could not have done it without the school boards. But I must say that if there is a problem, I think that then it's because, forgive me for saying this, but you underestimate the power that you can have. Let's just take this question of underfunding of schools again. If Phil were here, or Chief Darcy Bear is here, the First Nations will talk about treaty rights. And about treaty rights meaning that you've got to properly fund schools. And Canadians don't understand treaty rights. And they're not very concerned about treaty rights. Take the same question and say, you're discriminating in your funding. You're saying high school A over here, non-Aboriginal is getting full funding. High school over here, B, or grade school, is not getting full funding because it's Aboriginal. And Canadians are outraged. They're outraged. And so my point to the school boards is go public. Go public. For God's sake, don't hide your light behind a bushel. Because the one thing you don't understand, well, I'm sure you do understand, forgive me for saying that, but the one thing that you don't understand is that, is that we live in an era where the major institutions that govern us are really not respected. This is true of government, it is true of banks, it is true of so many of our major institutions. People who are involved in education are incredibly well respected. School boards are incredibly well respected. You may not think that. I can tell you, I go across this country, I deal with all of these kinds, all of the people who are involved in these kinds of things. The fact that you are involved in the education of people's children and grandchildren gives you a level of respect that you ought to be able to use, and you ought to be able to use it publicly, and if I were you, I sure as hell would.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Moyer from Toronto District School Board, and one that we have a large Aboriginal population that will identify themselves. It's a self-esteem issue we recognize. So how do school boards support students, and especially Aboriginal students, that not only have social and economic issues, but also the challenges of unaddressed mental health issues that stem from parents, including when mommy doesn't want to take them to school one day and they get confused as to whether school's important, And how does the community and others support school boards to address the mental health issues and accept it and move forward for the sake of kids?
Boy, that's huge and right on. I see it too. I'm just going to be repetitive here. You really have to educate yourselves, folks. But it's not bad. It's a good education. It's positive. It will make you stronger and give you actual facts and knowledge to pass on to other people. You have to understand that many parents who have been through residential schools or, kidnapping and raised in other homes, where who knows what they were, you have to understand when you see Native people out there on the street, and it's looking bad. These are people who were raised without parents. Maybe even their parents were raised without parents. Maybe anybody that they knew was raised without parents. They don't know how to parent. From my perspective as, Sesame Street entertainer and, singer-songwriter and educator and Aboriginal person, I can only give you a piece of it. It is a mental health issue in many, many instances. So I'm not the one to answer that question, but I can be supportive of it and tell you, Canada needs to know why Aboriginal people are cool. You need to know. I repeat, it's not enough to say you should be proud of your Indian culture. That is BS. That goes nowhere. So you need to find out. You need to believe yourself that Aboriginal people are cool, because they don't know. I know, but I have the luxury of, world travel and world access to other Indigenous communities, so I know, because I know both sides. But you don't, they don't. So I say that one of the nicest things you could do in your life, really, is to understand, the poverty of Aboriginal people isn't just money. We didn't have any parents. We didn't have mom or dad to love us. We were sex toys in residential schools. No wonder there are mental health issues. But beyond feeling bad about that and having it be an emotional issue, please convert it into either fire or fertilizer and grow something good. But you have to come to the lovely understanding of the content that has been denied us. And Jack Weatherford's Indian Givers is a start. The Cradle Board Teaching Project is another start. But please hang on to these ideals that you have that brought you to us today, and to the passion of commitment to schools, to education, to teaching. The teachers are in the same shape you are, and it's up to all of us to educate each other, I think.
Okay, it means that the summaries of our brilliant panelists is going to be cut short. I'm going to take, this is really the last question.
Because you're just stubbornly standing there and sit down. Just her.
Thank you very much. So our table was a table that was represented by provinces, like 3 or 4 provinces from BC all the way to our East Coast. And we kind of took our thinking up to a higher level. And we realize, as I think everybody in this room does, and certainly we're confident that you do, that a lot of these issues that we're talking about apply to every single one of our students that are in our schools. So we are wondering, how do we get Canadians to view education as the moral imperative that trustees do? How do we get them to feel our passion?
I think you have to make it hip. I do. I think you have to make it hip. There was a time when people say slavery will always be with us because of male aggression and because of bankers and because of this, that, and the other thing, right? We don't have slavery anymore. They say war is inevitable. It has always been with us. No, it hasn't. Read John Horgan's book, The End of War. War's only been around for about 13,000 years. Yeah. And it's not caused by male aggression and greedy bankers and lack of resources. It's not. We all have to be a part of the consensus in putting an end to anything like residential schools, but in also making things blossom. And the end of war was very hip in the 60s. And then it wasn't for a long time, right? And everything went to sleep, right? I think we have to hippify. I know that's not a word. I don't have a better one. I think if you have a passion for something, it's like Paul says, don't hide it under a bushel. Celebrate it. Talk about it at dinner. Talk about it to your friends. Support it with, letters and emails and things about television things that you think are cool. I mean, we can do this together. That we've only got us. It's only us. And I think that getting Canada to understand doesn't have to be a chore. It can be something great if we present it in the right way. I mean, you can bore somebody to death teaching them the alphabet or how to count. Big Bird isn't boring, see? So it's a matter of, I think, being clever and being very human about approaching the subject.
So I'm going to ask both Buffy and Paul, and maybe Paul, you can start, just to give us kind of closing thoughts, whatever they like, whatever they've sort of taken away from this or want to leave you with. Paul?
Well, I'm going to pick up on the last question as my closing. Relax. What do you want to speak? Get the hell with it. Do I go? What do I do?
You go.
Look.
With apologies, it really was the last question.
I've got 2 points to make.
But he'll be around after.
2 points. So will Amanda.
But I have to take off because we have a concert tonight in Laval. I got to leave right after this. Thank you.
2 points to make. First one is, don't refer to people from Saskatchewan drinking beer and later find out that half the room is full of people from Saskatchewan. I just have had, walking around the room, I had the most difficult half hour of my life.
And it was only 20 minutes.
Yeah. I'm going to go back, I want to go back to this question. The question was, how do you make Canadians feel passionate about education? The earlier question was, how do you give school boards the ability to act given that they're squeezed between sometimes parents who don't care, sometimes provincial governments who won't fund them properly. And then the other question was the whole question of underfunding. And all of those questions come together. I want to say to you that if you're asking those questions, they are really the scariest things that I have heard. There is a reason why in times of financial difficulty, when people pick up the paper every day and they hear that Europe is going to heck in a handbasket and all of this, that people get very concerned only about what they can do themselves, and they don't care about anything going on out. They really worry about, is my son or daughter going to get a job? Am I going to keep my job? And how am I going to hold on to it? And they have to look to leadership, to the people who are outside of them in the areas that they are. We essentially have grown up in a system where we send our kids to school and we don't pay a heck of a lot of attention because we think school boards, principals, and teachers are taking care of them. And we've made it an awful lot worse because the people who have the money then start sending their kids to private schools, and so they're not there to concern, and the people who don't have money are so tied up. And we really are creating a huge problem for ourselves as a country, and I think this is true of all of North America. I just want to repeat the point that I made. Education is the single most important thing, along with healthcare, for Canadians. There is no doubt about that. And anybody who is prepared to talk for education, anybody who's prepared to make the case publicly for education will win. Governments may appear to be able to act on the basis that we will make the decision and you will have to live with it. But governments cannot do that for long. And most governments don't cut funding because they want to. They make choices. And sometimes, a lot of times, those choices are based on what they think is right. Even more so, they're based on where they think the pressures are going to come from. So you are the people to make the pressures. You have huge public support behind you. But I just want to make one thing, because one argument to you I think you should make. And that is, we are going through a very difficult economic period in the world, and it is going to impact on Canada more than what we think. And what you're going to hear from governments is we cannot afford to do this. Now, nobody has to tell me about deficits. If there's one thing I think I understand, it is deficits. But understand, the argument that I think you can make, and the argument that I think you absolutely have to make, is that when a government cuts funding, which sometimes it has to do even if it doesn't want to, it is one thing to cut the funding to defer the building of a building. It is one thing to cut the funding that in fact you can pick up next year or the year after that. But if a 6-year-old going into grade 1 who has to learn to read by grade 3 doesn't learn to read because their funding has been cut, that 6-year-old cannot defer that. They're going to be 6 years old once in their life. Just take a look at your reaction to that statement. That you cannot take away from the 6-year-olds in this country, whether they be Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, you can't take away from them the ability to read or write because they will play catch-up for the rest of their lives. Now, think about what you've just done in Clapham. I'll tell you, if this was a room not of school board trustees, but if this was a room, I don't care whether they were doctors, lawyers, policemen, bulldozer operators, whatever it is you want in this country, they would applaud. Because they all understand that this affects their kids and their grandkids. Or maybe they understand what happened to them. And there is nobody that can make this argument more powerful than the school boards of this country. And if you make it, you'll win.
To hear that, yeah. To believe that, to know that. You're the ones who can do it. You guys can pull rabbits out of hats. No, you can. Believe in yourselves. You're such an important link. Not just between one thing and another, but, you know, you're in probably the most important role you'll ever have, except for being a parent yourself, you know. It's very, very important. Look at all the money that we've already poured into computers. When Cradle Board first started, we had to bring computers to the reservations and to the schools, teach the teachers how to use them, yeah? Sometimes even provide the lines. Now, an awful lot of schools in Canada are linked. You're already there. Your education is in competition with people who make video games, yeah? You can be using interactive multimedia to educate people and keep them excited. Kids aren't wrong for not coming to school. School is freaking boring. It is. It's boring. And see, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be, but you guys got to know it. Yeah, you have to know it. Sometimes the parents know it. Sometimes the parents say, I don't blame you. I don't want to go either. Because school is way behind times, but it doesn't have to be. This part of it is not hard. Updating the curriculum, making the curriculum fun, interesting, accurate and of benefit to all. That part is not difficult. What's difficult is keeping people inspired. I'm going to quote you a song that, yes, it was blacklisted, it was suppressed. I was put out of business in the US by 2 presidents who wanted to gag musicians from saying things that they didn't want to hear. And in those days, you know, nobody thought that that was going on. None of us knew. I didn't know for 20 years. But this is a song that comes from the 70s, but it's one that we're doing in our show. And I just keep thinking about it because I'm so grateful for, not only for Paul's comments and for Amanda being here, because we know it's going to have some legs, but really for your participation today and your caring and the questions that have come up. You guys have a lot of heart. And I just want you to keep it, you know, it's important. The song is called Look at the Facts.
Is there any chance you'll actually sing it?
Nah. Very good, because usually I have a band with me, right? I don't even have a guitar. Okay, I'll just do it a cappella, because what's important really are the words. Hold your head up, lift the top of your mind, put your eyes on the earth, lift your heart to your own home planet. What do you see? What is your attitude? Are you here to improve or damn it? Look at the facts, and you will see we're only here by the skin of our teeth as it is. So take heart and take care of your link with life. It ain't money that makes the world go around. That's only temporary confusion. It ain't governments that make the people strong. It's the opposite illusion. Look at the facts, and you will see they're only here by the skin of their teeth as it is. So take heart and take care of your link where life is beautiful. If you got the sense to take care of your source of protection, Mother Nature, she's the daughter of God and the source of all perfection. Well, look at the facts, and you will see she's only here by the skin of her teeth as it is. So take heart and take care of your link with life. Carry it on. Oh, carry it on. Oh, carry it on. Oh, carry it on. Look at the facts, and you will see we're only here by the skin of our teeth as it is. So take heart and take care of your link with life. Oh, carry it on. Come on, help me out. Oh, carry it on. Oh, carry it on. Here with it. Oh, carry it on.
Yeah. I just want you to know that I have been on stage and I have sung with Buffy Sainte-Marie.
What a gift. Wow, from Buffy, knowing that you have to sing tonight, to do that for us, that's really quite something. Prime Minister, I'm going to start calling you Prime Minister again now, with respect. And thanks to you both. I'm actually going to ask a beautiful, young, dynamic Algonquin leader from Quebec to come up and close us out here, Caitlin Tolley, if you'd join us on stage. Caitlin.
Kaikakana. Hello everyone. Caitlin Toling Indishnikaz. Naendayan Kitigan Zibi. Hello everyone. My name is Caitlin Toling, and I'm an Algonquin First Nation from the community of Kitigan Zibi. It is my deepest honor to come to Quebec City today and share the closing remarks after this wonderful session. I've been enlightened by the experiences of our speakers, their personal engagement to effectively implement change, and also by their ability to seize opportunities, build those relationships that make things happen. I was also impressed with their ability to listen to the needs of the community and to take that into consideration when talking serious action. This past June, I was actually just elected as the youngest person in my community ever to be elected onto band council in my community. And as a young leader in my community, I see merit in being engaged, value in respecting traditions from not only my people, but from others of our great nation, and even if they are from a different home. The value of reconciliation of differences and the power of seeing other inspiring role models around me. What I take away from this session is guidance and some direction, and to continue being involved in my community and being engaged and to continue on with our vision. I hope that all of you, as leaders in your own communities, have appreciated as much as I have the vivid, dynamic, engaging conversations of this morning. Beyond presenting, they shared with us their passion for what they believe in. And I don't know about you, but today I am feeling very inspired. And I believe that your participation here today is also a remarkable commitment towards working together for future collaboration. And I'd like to encourage every one of you in this room, when you go back home to your communities or your cities, to think about the conversations that we had here today, and to think about First Nations people in Canada, and specifically First Nations youth, as we're the fastest growing population in Canada, and how the benefits of education, and we can work together. Inside of me, and I'm sure inside of each of all the presenters here, there's a fire burning inside me. And today, I'd like to pass that torch down to you. And I don't know about you, but I was feeling inspired, and in my language, we say, Kikanen dam nongom, Niga ninwabung, which means learn today and lead tomorrow. So please join me in thanking our excellent speakers, Buffy Sainte-Marie, Prime Minister Paul Martin, and Amanda Lang for an enthusiastic and personable morning to get the topic of Aboriginal youth up on our list where it belongs. Kichimigwai.